It's setting up the meeting.
So up at the top, if you will.
So much pressure.
No,
I know. Can you guys see me? I'm sweating.
So now if you will send me that URL that you just created in YouTube, I will post that in Facebook.
All right, how do I get back to Zoom? There it is.
I'm looking on the channel now to see if I can find it. There you are. Okay, I got it.
I just sent it to you.
Okay.
All right, guys.
All right, I'm going to log off. Good luck, guys.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, can any of you watch the Facebook page if there are any questions that come up there? I don't know if you can do that.
Yeah, I can pull it up on my phone.
All right. We'll give people a few minutes to connect. While we're doing that, Donde, do you have any good jokes or anything? No? You're muted, Donde.
Brad, I have one.
No. Normally I have some, but I didn't even plan anything right now. I watch a lot of TV shows on Netflix and Hulu, so normally I'll just use some of those pop culture references they all seem to get. Students come in late and I'll say, well, who dropped a chili? And they just all understand that if they watch The Office. So, or when they walk in, I'll say things such as, we were just talking about you. And that sort of, everyone knows I was talking about everybody. So.
I only know one joke, and my brother told this joke at the state fair at the Missouri lottery booth and won like $50 or something like that. And so I remembered that joke, and it's, so the horse walked into the bar and the bartender said, so why the long face? It's the only joke I know.
Does it look like it's live?
Yes.
Yeah. It's not live on my phone. It says this live event will begin in a few moments.
Oh, I didn't click on the link. I was just waiting for comments on Facebook.
It says it's live, and this is funny. If it's live, we're having this conversation about is it live? So
Clicked on the upper corner, said view live on YouTube, and then it opened up a different page.
Yeah, it says
Yeah, Brad Henderson just commented and said you are live, so he must be able to hear our.
Awesome.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to our first teaching tips session. Maybe it's a series if this goes over well, but today we have a panel of experts from State Fair Community College who are going to provide some teaching tips on teaching with Zoom. Teaching tips is something meaningful to me. I started teaching at a community college more than 30 years ago. And I was a professional journalist and decided to teach journalism at a community college. And there's a college that hired me. And I knew nothing about teaching. I thought I knew something about teaching, but I knew nothing about teaching. I knew a little bit about journalism, but nothing about teaching. And I think today that, the ethical thing to do would be for me to write a check right now to those first students and just refund their tuition. I was such a lousy teacher. But I found a book in the library, and it was called Teaching Tips, and it's by McKeechee. And it's actually in our State Fair library. There are several copies on reserve. And this book had just kind of pragmatic teaching tips, kind of on active learning teaching tips in the classroom. And so whenever I was stuck on how to present something, I'd kind of peruse through this book and, things like 1 minute assessment and things like that. Well, that was 30 years ago. It was in fact, it was so long ago, Socrates was a co-author of that book, the teaching tips, but it's been updated since several editions since then. But that's kind of I envision the format for this session today. So we have our experts and they're going to share their teaching tips, those kind of pragmatic ways to use Zoom to improve your instruction. So I'm just going to kind of introduce the team with the first question, and I'm going to kind of go around the board on our Hollywood Squares screen. And so our first question that actually two questions for the team. How do you use Zoom in your classrooms? And what is your number one teaching tip for using Zoom? So I'm going to pitch it first to one of our Zoom pioneers, Kara Barth-Fagan. She and Donde Ramirez, who's also on this panel, were among the first at State Fair Community College to use Zoom. So they have a wealth of experience here using that. So kick us off, Kara.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody out in internet land. I'm glad you all joined us today. I'm going to show you an image that I've pulled up real quick that is called the learning pyramid. And I use this a lot in my education classes. And I just want you to see how technology can fit into this learning pyramid, and Zoom especially, because we're able to connect each other. And it's, although a little different format, we are still live and together. And so I use Zoom in conjunction with this learning pyramid, as it shows that I have my students present presentations to the group using Zoom. And a lot of that involves discussion groups, which, as you can see, teaching others is the majority of the bottom of this pyramid. 90% of students learn better if they're taught by others, not just a lecture that I would be giving through Zoom, but if they're engaged and their pals or their peers are teaching them. And also then by that middle discussion group, 50%. And so I wanted to share that that's something that I use oftentimes, is a presentation format and discussion groups. And I use the breakout rooms to do that. So I guess, how do I use Zoom? I use it so that I can teach and let others teach the group. And my number one teaching tip is use the breakout rooms for small group discussions or even one-on-one discussions, because those are really, you force people to be together and they have to talk to each other in those breakout rooms. And it's a great tool that Zoom has. So those are my answers to your two questions. I'll let Don.
I need a follow-up. So I'm a Zoom kind of rookie. So yeah. How does the breakout room work? What is that and how does it work?
Well, the breakout room is an option that all people who host the meetings have. And you have the option to put them into groups manually. You get to pick who gets to be with each other, or it does it randomly. And you can have multiple breakout rooms. So next Wednesday, I'm going to have about 20 administrators, and that's superintendents and principals from around the areas, and they're going to talk to my education students. And so I will manually put 1 to 2 students in a breakout room with about 3 to 5 administrators, and they're going to be like a small group, like this is with the 6 of us showing up on the screen, where they can interact with each other and talk and ask questions, and they're going to actually interview those administrators. And so that breakout room allows you to put students into groups, just as you would have them break out into breakout groups in the room, in the classroom. You're just manually putting them into a room that opens up separately from the main session. They go out. You can tell them, check back in 5 minutes, close your rooms in 5 minutes, or you can manually close their rooms and gives them 60 seconds of a warning to then come back as a whole group to the Brady Bunch style, or as you called it, what did you call it? I don't remember what you called it, the game show, but I call it Brady Bunch because we all look like we're,
Hollywood Squares.
Hollywood Squares, that was it, yeah. So, so that's how the breakout room works, and you can use it for a question, think, pair, share question. You can do the interviews like I'm going to do, or just as discussion to talk about topics. And Dr. Bates, you are muted right now. That happens all the time, by the way. You forget to unmute yourself.
Rookie mistake.
That's okay. I forgive you.
Hey, so next on our Hollywood Squares checkerboard is Sarah Nail. And by the way, I forgot to introduce Kara, and Kara is our division chair in humanities. What is the whole title of that division?
Humanities and Fine Arts, Social Sciences, Education, Criminal Justice, Early Childhood
I
Development.
should have written that down.
It's a long one.
And Kara is also the program coordinator for our teaching program. So thank you, Kara. So next on our group is Sarah Nail, and she's our public speaking instructor. And she also teaches in journalism. So, you know, Sarah and I have a special relationship there as former journalists, now teachers. So Sarah?
Great. I have used Zoom in 5 ways. I've taught a web conference Zoom class, kind of similar to what Kara is talking about, where I have an on-campus course and then I have students that participate via Zoom web conferencing. Now, though, I use Zoom for office hours. I use it for recording announcements, presentations, things like that. I use Zoom for conferences one-on-one with students. And then I also am using Zoom for the student presentations in my public speaking courses. So for my office hours, I log on, I have a waiting room. Students know what times I'm available. They can hop on when they want. For the recordings, I use it similar to like you would any other sort of recording lecture capture type of program, and have used those for sort of mini lectures using the screen share feature to display a presentation. And then conferencing I've used for working with students on their outlines or news articles that they are working on. I've also used the conferencing with adjunct faculty. So when I have an adjunct that's, you know, kind of trying to figure out how to find something in our Canvas course or learning how to use Zoom, then I'll have them connect with me via Zoom and show them some things that way too. And then this time I'm using, for the end of this semester, Zoom for student presentations for my on-campus classes. So I had students that signed up to take public speaking in a face-to-face setting, and to adapt to that alternative learning platform, I am having them deliver via Zoom, because I just didn't think that it was really fair to have them have the same expectations as an online public speaking student when that's not something that they were prepared for. And so I have all 75 of my students sign up on a Google Doc for delivery dates and times. I offer them a variety of times, so morning, afternoon, evening, and they sign up for what days and times work for them. And they might be paired with 5 other students who weren't in their original classroom, which has been fine. When they do meet up with somebody that's been in their classroom, that's always fun too. They're like, oh, so excited to see each other. And they might know some of the students from other classes that they've had too. And that has worked really, really well in delivering those presentations, and I think provided some additional value. Having students present via Zoom really gives them a really great tool and skill that they can use in other places. Think about how many times we've been on hiring committees and the first round of interviews is via Zoom. So, you know, learning how to present yourself well in this type of platform, I think is really going to help our students in the long run in a variety of ways. So that has worked out really well, and something I might end up integrating more into my online classes because it has worked so well with my face-to-face students. My number one teaching tip for using Zoom, I can't pick just one, so I got to break the rules. One is to try using Zoom yourself on a variety of devices, okay? Because it looks different. It looks different if I get on Zoom on my phone versus my iPad versus our Kindle tablet versus my MacBook. So I try to get on Zoom on a variety of different devices so that I'm kind of familiar with maybe where some of the functions are located. The other thing is that I think as much as possible, you really need to encourage students to be on camera. So in making that an expectation, this is really easy to check out if you are not, people can't see your face. they can't know that you're watching Netflix at the same time as you're supposed to be listening to your peer. Yep, there you go. Dr. Bates is now, yep, I caught you, see? I really think that that's important in terms of the productivity and the connectivity. And obviously there are times when people don't necessarily have to be on screen. If you have a meeting with 50 to 100 people, I mean, that maybe doesn't make sense. But if you're really trying to connect with your students, they need to be on camera. And that should just be the expectation. I'm sure there's going to be times when technology doesn't allow for that for certain students, and being flexible with that. But really think that they should be on camera, and giving students the opportunity to orient themselves to Zoom, to figure out how to turn on the camera, where the mute button is, how to share their screen before you really get into the course content too. So those are my tips.
Well, great tips. Thank you, Sarah. And what you don't know is I am sending a link of this presentation to all of your students, and their critiques will be arriving via email on your speech today. So look for that. Our next on our list is Dawn Macklin, and she's an early childhood education instructor in the CTC. And she also teaches on our education program, early childhood education, as an adjunct faculty member. And so Dawn, how do you use Zoom, and what is your #1 teaching tip?
Thank you, Dr. Bates. Well, first of all, I want to say I probably am not as an expert as the rest of these people. So I'm going to throw Dara under the bus because she's the one that threw me under the bus to get me in this group. But anyway, so I use it a couple of different ways. Some of the ways I use are like Sarah, and some of the ways I use are like Kara. I also use it with my high school students. And because we obviously cannot see each other and connect with each other, I feel like this is a really important tool to use with them, because I have those kids for 2.5 hours every day for 2 years. So I have really built a relationship with them. And they were on practice nights when this, and some of them were on spring break if they went to Smith Cotton. So when we kind of all shut down, they were, there was no closure for them. So for them to be able to connect with me through Zoom has been really helpful to them. I also use Zoom to record videos and put them in my daily announcements or my weekly announcements for my high school students, because that enables me to share the documents or to go into Canvas and point, because my students are, even though we've used Canvas all year, it's still kind of new to them. So they can at least see where I'm pointing at, what I'm talking about, opening the documents to say, this is what I want you to do, and this is when it's due, and this is how to upload it, and that sort of thing. I also use Zoom in my fall class, which is administration in early child care centers. It's a Zoom, I guess, hybrid class, kind of like Sarah's is, where I have some on campus and some at Lake of the Ozarks, Clinton. And that was my first time using Zoom. And so at Kara, I used the breakout sessions, because when I taught that class strictly on campus, we did a lot of group activities. And so it was something that the chat rooms I use almost every Monday night, just to be able to connect with them, especially since some of these students are at Lake of the Ozarks or at Clinton. And so it also helps them connect with other students in the class that are probably working in childcare, and so they can network with each other and work on things. I have a document that I want to share with you that, if I can find it, that I put in my class shell. I found this document on Teachers Pay Teachers. And so it just, I don't know if you can't really see the top, but the middle part is kind of the most important thing, is that I want them to show up on time. And I want them to find a quiet place, maintaining respect when they're speaking, when they're writing, and in their appearance. And then I also ask them that when they are in the session with me, that they stay on mute, that they either click the raise their hand button or they physically raise their hand, so that we know, because you know how we teachers are, we all like to talk, we all have great ideas, and sometimes we like to talk at the same time. So I just ask them to do that as a respect for everybody else. And then I also, like Sarah, I say, your video needs to remain on, just so that I know that you're engaged, because we are in a society where a lot of times students and people aren't engaged in conversation. They might be nodding their head or not even paying attention. So, and then the last one is kind of an iffy for me. I ask them not to chew gum or eat while they're watching or while they're in front of the camera, but I don't really mind them drinking. That's just kind of a personal preference, because I know that, as teachers, we work a lot and we need to drink something as well. So I think my biggest suggestion is don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of Zoom. If you relax and you just let your students know, hey, I'm having technical difficulties on this side, or you're having technical difficulties, but I'm here to help you. That is probably the best way. Just relax, remain calm. I know I was one of those students or one of those teachers that when I first started and I couldn't hear somebody or they couldn't hear me, I was just like, oh my gosh, but actually forcing me to use Zoom more now because we're all staying at home, I think has helped me understand it better. And like Sarah said, try to use it from different devices. But I think sometimes if you can see what it looks like from the student's view, sometimes that helps as well. So those are my tips.
Very good, Dawn. Well, you underestimated yourself. You sounded like an expert at least. And I too find that drinking while I'm teaching Zoom helps, makes me more relaxed. Or did I misunderstand you? You were
not that kind of drink.
Not that kind of drinking. I'm sorry. I misunderstood that.
That'll be our secret.
Okay. All right. Next, going counterclockwise, we have Donde Ramirez. Donde, again, is a pioneer Zoom instructor, and he teaches, he's a full-time adjunct for us. He teaches sociology, history, American diversity, American family. He's an excellent teacher for us, and we're happy to have him on our staff. Donde, how do you use Zoom, and what is your #1 teaching tip?
Well, thanks for having me. I've taught Zoom now for about maybe 4 or 5 semesters, so since the pilot program. And I typically have always taught the classes from Clinton and then gone to the lake, via Zoom, and then gone to Whiteman Air Force Base. So I've sort of gotten used to it. This semester, before being shut in, so to speak, I ended up going and driving to Whiteman 1 or 2 days a week and driving to the lake 1 or 2 days a week. So that this way I can meet them, students, personally. I found early on that many students in some classes, because each class is different, some of those students were really, really comfortable with the Zoom, and they ended up liking me being at a distance or me being closer, while others felt disconnected. So by going from campus to campus, it helped them get connected a little bit better. They got to know my personality better rather than just jump on the screen and just hear me speak. I can be a little bit nerdy in class before everyone gets there, and a little bit looser, a little bit more, shall we say, childish. They sort of like that stuff. And this made them more comfortable speaking. So I've used it that way, and all of my classes have been taught that way now for, again, the better part of 2.5 or 3 years. So I've typically just used it just to communicate in a regular class-to-class basis. Some of the features I have liked, this is the first semester I've used it, were the videos. I didn't realize we could record those. And every semester I'll have students, I'll say, write this in APA format, and I'll get MLA and Chicago and everything else but APA. And this semester I've been able to go through and say, this is what APA format looks like, and actually physically type the paper and then share the video. Instead of just spending class time doing it, I can do it outside of class, and then they can watch it at their own leisure. I've had students use some of the reactions if they wanted to speak. So it'll show like little hand clapping or things up around the corner. And this way I'll know the student has a question he or she wants to address at that particular time. I haven't really used the chat sessions or the breakouts yet. I never really considered doing those because most of my groups are, again, some at the lake, some at Clinton, some at Whiteman, some in Boonville. And so they're typically in groups themselves anyway. So I'll just have this group work with this group and then we'll get back together. But I will try that because that sounds actually pretty interesting. My #1 teaching tip is just to be a little bit loose and relaxed about it. For many of the students, again, they may not necessarily know enough about the technology, or maybe they have a smartphone, but it's not really a really good powered smartphone, not to be demeaning of any particular phone brand, but some of them are just not, they don't have the same features. And so oftentimes they can't really share the videos, or if they do share the video, it's very, very slow and delayed. Sometimes we have to pause a second to make sure they can get the question and then answer it because there's a delay in the questions. So I've tried to be just a little bit more relaxed about things like that. to keep them involved, I typically just call on each individual student. So I'll set up questions before class or things that sort of will stand out a little bit more. Maybe a pop culture reference that relates to that particular topic we're talking about. In sociology, when we're talking about power structures, we might use things like The Walking Dead or The Office or, any number of different shows that many of the students have watched. And so they can see how that character reacts. And so it makes it connect to them a little bit differently. So just be loose and relax and remember that each student in that class is probably very, very nervous about it. They don't want to mess up, or they don't want to hear something in the background that maybe they don't want everyone else to hear. Actually, I had a student yesterday, because you guys were mentioning the videos, and he didn't have his video shared. He almost never does. And I always try to get him to, but he doesn't. And I guess he didn't realize he didn't have it on mute, and he was watching something in the background. And his mom said, "Hey, would you turn the TV off and pay attention in class?" And I thought that was really, really fun. So everyone else in class heard him. He apologized, and he did turn his video on. So it's sort of neat.
All right, thank you, Nande. And last, we have Amanda Steckline, and Amanda made a similar transition as me from profession into education. And so she's really new to teaching, and I've enjoyed watching her exploration of the teaching art and developing that art. And she is an excellent instructor and has done a great job with that. So Amanda, how do you use Zoom, and what is your number one teaching tip? Oh, and by the way, she's a program coordinator for business management. I meant to say that.
So yes, I use Zoom pretty much the way that everyone else has already mentioned. Something unique to our program in business management is, like Sarah said, having a skill of being able to be on camera and facilitate discussions like this is really important in the workplace. And I think more so now than ever, a lot of people are recognizing some of the benefits of working from home, and they're probably going to develop a new kind of mix for that. And so we actually, in our Principles of Management class, have a team meeting assignment. This is used instead of the discussion boards, and I put them into small groups, and then they utilize Zoom to facilitate team meetings. So I'll give them a topic, and I will give them everything. They create an agenda. They use Zoom to facilitate the meetings. They take minutes, all those kinds of things, just like they would be leading a meeting if they were part of a group and an organization. So that's really worked well. The students are definitely nervous about it. The first week, the assignment's really just to familiarize themselves with video conferencing and play around with it. But once they do it once or twice, then I think they definitely prefer it to filling out, the multiple discussion boards every week. So that's been really good. Another thing, just to piggyback a little bit off the breakout rooms, when I have a large group, especially if I'm zooming to a campus, a lot of times I'll ask a question and everybody gives me the blank stare and they just look at me and nobody wants to answer. And so I use the breakout rooms because they actually talk, just like in class. When I give them a question, they look at me like I'm, an alien. I say, okay, just talk in your small groups and then let me know. And then they're just da, 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 da. So that same thing happens on Zoom. So I try to break them out just to give them a break from me so that they're able to talk about things without me being right there to hear them. So those are kind of two of the ways that I like to use Zoom and of course in these other things. And my tips just to not be afraid to make mistakes. So we're going to give you lots of different tips and you're probably reading articles and all those things. Try it. If it doesn't work, try something different. I've failed a couple different times with things that I've tried to implement. And so it's not that big of a deal. They're not really sitting in judgment of you typically. So just try new things. And if it doesn't work, try something different.
Well, thank you. And so, now I am in our new work from home environment. I'm on Zoom all day long and managing meetings and things like that. And some of the techniques that they're using in classrooms, I find you can also use in meetings. One of them is to help watch the chat. So sometimes when you're engaged in conducting the meeting, questions come up in the chat and you can't see it. So one technique I've heard that you can use in the classroom, I've tried in meetings, is assign someone to watch the chat and ask questions, or if people raise hands, to help manage that classroom. That also keeps people engaged. So we have some questions that have been submitted previously, but we've also assigned Amanda Steckline to watch the Facebook, the college's Facebook channel to see if there are any questions posted there. So if you have a question that comes up, feel free to post that there, and Amanda will try to watch that. And otherwise, we have other questions that have been submitted previously. So the first question that came in from our faculty: how do you facilitate effective classroom discussions using this tool? How's the best way to get those discussions occurring? Who wants to take that? Kara.
I'd love to take that one. Thank you. And anyone, feel free to chime in too, because I know we all have great ideas, but facilitating that classroom discussion is important for you to ask the question, and this is in any class, ask the question, give them time to think about it and process it, because they may not have the answer right away. And so waiting 30 seconds, maybe a little bit longer for them to process and think of an answer is good. Plus you're using technology, and they have to remember to unmute themselves and be able to talk, or otherwise you'll see their face talking and you can't hear them. And internet connection speeds are different. So you're going to have lag time between when you ask the question and when they can hear it, and then process time. So allow that extra time. Don't be afraid to spend that extra 30 seconds waiting and asking for that answer. If you don't get an answer, maybe rephrasing it in another way. And if you find that your students in your class don't engage in that conversation, if you don't get a lot of conversation coming from your classroom questions, maybe then breaking them into those smaller breakout rooms like Amanda stated, and Dawn, where you give them an activity and you flip the classroom almost, where you talk about the chapter in those smaller groups. You give them a question or topic or item to discuss, and go out, break out, and have them talk. And then the nice feature about the chat or the breakout room, which we haven't mentioned, is that the facilitator can join any of those breakout rooms at any point. So I'll jump into one, I'll listen in, I'll ask a question, just like I would if I were walking around the room listening. I'll jump out, go to a second room, listen in. They'll notice you're there because you show up on screen. They're like, okay, and then they keep talking. Yeah, like, should we stop talking about what we were, were we on topic? Hopefully she heard us. And then you can jump out, and a lot of times it allows those students to feel more comfortable talking to smaller groups by putting them in those breakout rooms. So I facilitate discussions by flipping it onto them, putting them into breakout rooms, and allowing that extra time for them to think about it, for that to happen, so they can hear it, process it, and then respond. Someone else have another part?
I like to sort of, I don't want to say give them the questions ahead of time, but oftentimes it's in the reading, or I'll, predict the next class period and say, well, next time we're talking, let this deviance for sociology, for example. I might say things like, all right, we're going to talk about differential association and et cetera, et cetera. And oftentimes when we come back to class, I'll just pretend not to know anything. Be like, I don't even know what this means. Just explain this to me, and have them try to teach me these things. And as they're starting to talk about it, I'll fill in the gaps and say, oh, so you mean this is what it would be if this was a situation. If your friends drank more often, then you're more likely to do it. And sometimes I'll say, yeah, that makes sense. It's like, do you have a story you want to share? And oftentimes I've had to stop a couple because they've not quite been as appropriate as they probably should be. But oftentimes I'll sit there and say, yeah, I remember when I was 15 years old and my older brother were drinking, and they told me to try it. So I did, and I really didn't like it, but I only did it because of the peer pressure. And a lot more students have those stories. And so then they open up and share their stories. And so then that's how I sort of know if they're either getting the material or if there's something else I have to do a little bit differently. But this keeps everything sort of moving along until we get to a snag where maybe they're not comfortable with the material. Then I'll go back and start re-lecturing on it and making sure they have that. But this way I know at least they have some of it, and I can fill in the gaps on everything else.
Something else I do quite often is I check for understanding. So I'll say, give me a thumbs up if you understand, or if you're good with the concept, or give me a thumbs down. And if I see more thumbs down, then I'll say, okay, what's your specific question? Because sometimes people aren't comfortable enough to just stop me when I'm talking or lecturing. And I want to make sure that I can check for understanding. So I do the thumbs up, thumbs down.
I want to echo or add on to what Kara had said earlier. I think it's also good as educators that we remember that all of our students have different learning types. And so sometimes when you're on Zoom now and they're not in the classroom, where sometimes in the classroom we have the question or something that we're talking about on the board or on a piece of paper in front of them. So now we may not have that on the board in front of them and we ask them this question. And we have to remember we have some of those students that are auditory learners, but we have students that are visual learners too. And so they may have to physically write it down and look at it, or they may take a little bit longer. And so I think one of the biggest things that I've learned just as a teacher in general is don't be afraid of that pause. You know, I use that pause a lot with my high school students, and I tell my college students too, I'm like, you know, I'm a high school student by trade and I don't really have a problem waiting until someone answers. But sometimes I think we need to really remember the different types of learning skills that our students have.
Great point. Well, so establishing rapport with students is an important part of teaching. How do you do that with the Hollywood Square format here? How do you establish rapport with students? Amanda, you want?
I'll start with a couple tips that we do. And I think several of us probably use the same ones, but one of the things is having the one-on-one conversations with students. There's a few different ways to facilitate that. I actually create an assignment similar to when we do introduction discussion boards and discussion posts. And I require students to set up a time with me during the first week. And I have a one-on-one meeting, 5 to 10 minutes. It's not a long meeting, but I just introduce myself, put the face with the name, help them feel comfortable with the technology so that when they jump into more of these Zoom meetings and team meetings with other people, they're comfortable with the technology. So it's kind of a two-part thing. But then that also allows me to have a conversation with them, get to know them a little better. I've already read their introduction typically to the other students, so I know a little bit about them, and I can use that to have that discussion. So that's one good way. Another way that Kara had mentioned when we were talking was just to call students by name as soon as they join in on the class, so acknowledge that they're there. And once you start having those discussions, a lot of times you'll be able to say, so how's such and such going? Or, you know a little bit more about them, so you can facilitate those same kind of discussions with them. So that really has gone a long way. And honestly, I don't know if it was just by chance, but I had a lot less students who actually dropped the class or quit doing work after I tried to, and this is in an online class, after I had these one-on-one Zoom meetings. So I'm going to keep track of that data just to see if that was a fluke or if there's something to that. But yeah, I ended up giving all of them grades at the end of the semester. I didn't have anybody that dropped and quit doing stuff. So
Sweet. Kara?
I want to piggyback on what Amanda's talking about with doing those one-on-one conferences. It is very enlightening to get to know those students on a personal level, because especially if you're teaching a group of students sitting at tables at a site. So let's say I teach students at Lake of the Ozark and at Clinton and Whiteman Air Force Base, and they're all sitting at tables. I can't physically see the back row. I don't know what they look like. And so those one-on-one conferences, I get to see them closer and I get to make better eye contact with them. And I always make sure I call on everybody in the class when I'm talking to them, especially greeting them. But those one-on-one conferences allows me the opportunity to get to meet them, even though physically we're not in the same room. I get to meet them. And I did actually, the very first semester that I taught, I had a student leave negative comments that they didn't feel like I addressed them, or that I always left them out. And they sat on the back row. You know, people sit in specific spots for reasons. I always sit on the front row because I'm an active learner. I want to get everything. But this particular student sat in the back row, and I did call on the student, but it was very hard to get answers out of this student. And I just, after that, I implemented the individual conferences because I thought, you know, maybe I wasn't doing the best job in in talking to them. And maybe they didn't feel like we were making that connection because of the distance of the internet and the distance physically in the room. So that's when I started implementing the one-on-one conferences. And I feel like that has helped tremendously.
Yeah.
Sarah.
I use kind of some of the similar things, but I think it's the way it is with any class in establishing rapport. You know, you're going to use the same methods in Zoom as you do in a traditional classroom. And one of the things I think that we might forget to do is engage in that non-content conversation, you know, like as everybody's kind of joining in the Zoom meeting room, you know, we're talking about a variety of things that are not on the topic of public speaking or interpersonal communication, right? And I think that it's the same, you know, and sometimes I don't know that students really expect that, you know, it's kind of this is business, serious business here, but really as much as you can emulate that same kind of the same feeling that you put off in your classroom, you have to sort of channel that here as well. And it doesn't always have to be about the content. It doesn't always have to be about the coursework. And I mean, I had a group of students after our round of speeches that stayed on Zoom for like 30 minutes. I thought, oh, they're going to want to go, you know, this was like a 7 to 8 p.m. session. I'm like, they're going to be done. They're going to want to go. We chatted for 30 minutes afterwards, had the best time, saw somebody's puppies, you know, it was so great. It was such a good experience that all of the students wanted to get in the same speaking group for our next round of speeches, you know? And so I think you want to embrace the same things that you embrace in your traditional classroom.
Yes, that's probably could apply to a lot of the teaching tips, you know, teaching tips that work in the on-ground classroom probably, or, you know, you can try in the Zoom classroom. Well, we talked about engaging with the students, but Donde and Kara both referred to those students that aren't necessarily engaged themselves. What are your tips to bringing out the disengaged student? Who wants to try that? Donde?
I think I said before we started the meetings, I spend a great deal of time studying pop culture. So I watch Netflix and Hulu and Disney. And I try to find, like, the beginning of each semester, I'll try to have them fill out this little sort of document. It just will have favorite movies, favorite books, favorite TV shows. And so this way we can talk about some of those things one-on-one when we have our meetings, you know, before other students get in, or we'll set up a time to meet with someone, a conference with them, and talk about those things. And oftentimes, if I know what they're interested in, again, I can add those things to the lecture somewhere, maybe post a picture of this anime character as part of the PowerPoint and why that relates to the topic. And oftentimes, because they can relate to those characters, they're more engaged into some of the stuff we talk about in class. It's worked for me thus far. Each class is different, as we've talked about, though. And so I've had a couple classes where I've had students who are just not there. I don't advise everyone to do this, but that's why I started driving to and from the lake 1 or 2 days a week, and then driving to and from Whiteman. So this way, those students who are not as engaged, then at least if I'm in class one of those days, they're engaged for that day, you know. And oftentimes, because they're engaged that day, then they'll stay engaged for some of the other classes. It's been a little bit more challenging this second half of the semester. But, you know, typically, again, as I mentioned earlier, my one student, his mom sort of kept him involved. And so maybe having someone there to hold their hand might be of benefit.
Kara?
Dr. Bates, I saw on one of the links that Linda Hoffman has a couple questions that I might be able to answer. And it also kind of pertains to what your question was with disengaged students. If you can't attend a class or students aren't paying attention, it is possible for anyone teaching to record their sessions and then post them in the class, in the modules as a link. I usually upload them into YouTube and create an unlisted link. And then they're able to go back and watch the video of the content that was in the class at a later date. And so creating a video or adding a video in Zoom, you can record your whole session, and then in YouTube, it's very, very easy to upload a video and save it and share it. But you can also share things on your screen that might help engage students. And so like at the beginning, when I shared with you my figure, I do that often. I also show videos, short clips on the topics that we're talking about. When you do share things on your screen, there is an option when you click it to share computer sound. And I always tell my students when they're presenting, if they have a video, make sure you click the little button on the share screen window that says share computer audio, so that we can hear the videos audio too. But I'll do that too. And there's a polling feature. I've never used the polling feature, but that's another way to keep kids engaged. Or as in, elementary school classrooms, they play games all the time. So I've used an integrated Kahoot where I create questions in the game to share about the chapter. And in fact, last week I did the whole chapter. It was a Kahoot game, and I gave extra credit points as they were playing. So, ways to keep them engaged. Don't always do lecture, and spice it up a little bit. Do the games, the videos, the small breakout groups, and it's not the best tactic, but call on them by name. That's, some kids don't like that. And especially our kids with special needs, those who are in special education, it takes them extra long to process some of the questions anyway. So we have to be leery that they may not understand the question being asked and are afraid to answer it. So you don't want to call out students all the time like that. That might embarrass them. And Dondi, you gave a great example of relating to pop culture and asking them to explain the concept to you.
If a student enrolled in a Zoom class, then they're expected to have that technology. We have some students that were kind of thrown into it and didn't expect to have that technology. But so I was in a meeting with economic developers this week or last week, and no one turned on their video. And I'm pretty sure they were all doing extra work because they didn't participate in the meeting. They weren't engaged. Do you all require students to turn on their video in their Zoom class? Everybody's shaking their heads. Yes. Yeah.
It sort of depends. So I have a couple students who just had babies, and while they should be engaged, babies eat when babies eat, and so oftentimes they won't necessarily share the video, or all of my students have my personal number to text me if there's an emergency and they can't make it. I'm so fearful of a student getting into an accident on the way to campus, as evidenced by my accident this last semester. And so I don't want anyone to get hurt. And so if they're not going to show up, I say, just text me and let me know so that I know that you're not on the road somewhere. And oftentimes they'll say, hey, I'm not going to be able to turn my video on because the baby's eating, or, my little brother's home and I'm have to watch him, or my little sister's home. And so they're running around and I don't want to hear the screaming and stuff. So, so it sort of depends. Most of the time they have it on, but there are a few students who won't. And usually I know why beforehand.
Kara?
Sometimes when videos are on and extra things are going on in the background, it is distracting for the other students. And so that might be a rule that you lay down at the beginning that, hey, if you've got extra people and you know that it's going to be chaotic while you're in class, don't worry about it. Just let me know. And you won't be counted absent, because I do require the face for their participation points, when they do show up. But I understand. I did have a mom who just had a baby and she holds the baby. But like you said, Dondi, they eat when they want to eat and they cry when they want to cry. So at least muting helps that. But I also have had students put their kitty cat up in the screen, or kitty cat walks by, or puppy, or a little kid pops in, and I don't care, all the time if that happens, but it is distracting for the other students. And so that's my 2 cents.
Sarah, did you have a comment or? Nope. Okay. So do you set, I've heard it's important to set those expectations up front, and maybe it's even, you should wear a shirt, what your dress expectations, how to talk, things like that. And those are just like in a classroom, you set those expectations up prior to the class and the course syllabus and follow those. A lot of you just are describing active learning techniques in your Zoom classroom. And I'm a big fan of active learning. But sometimes I think students are used to more traditional lecture formats. So they associate education with lecturing, and they sometimes don't think they're learning when you're not lecturing. So how do you help students understand that you're teaching and they're learning when you're doing these what is it?
Kahoot, K-A-H-O-O-T.
If you're doing Kahoot, how do they know they're actually learning something? How do you make that connection? Amanda, you want to start us off on that one?
Yeah, there's some tools like Kara mentioned with polling built into the program where you can actually try to assess it as you're going through. So that's more of a quick way of just ensuring that everybody's on the same page or that they understand. You can take a quick poll. Also, I use a third-party site called Socrative. And so I can use my screen share real fast and just share. They have, and it's free, it's just something you sign up for, but they have something called an exit ticket. And I use that a lot in my classes. So towards the end, I'll have them log in from their phones or their devices. And, it goes through 3 questions. So it asks them how well they feel they mastered the material, what did they learn, and then they can answer that third question is whatever you want to ask. So it's not something you have to pre-program in. You have the option to, but you can definitely do it on the fly, especially if it's something that you're not real sure if everyone's kind of got it. I'll jump to that if I need a little bit extra feedback, and that will just kind of reassure what they actually got out of the class. So you can use either one of those tools. There's a lot of other tools to help you kind of assess that, but I would encourage you to make sure that you're still doing that kind of informative assessment to gauge where they're at throughout it. And you can definitely do that with the technology.
On ground, I used to have students do what I call the light bulb comes on moment. What is the most important thing you learned from this lesson? And they would share that. And I think there's research, Kara, in education about education being more effective if students think about how they're learning, and so that light bulb moment, it caused them to think, oh yeah, what am I supposed to learn from that? And it just seemed to, things clicked and the light bulb did come on in that kind of 1 minute assessment that is occurring. Other comments on that, or Kara?
There's a teacher tool that I share with my educational technology students, and I'm going to share that too for you guys to see. It's called let me pull it up here, Classroom Screen. And it's a website that you can go to where you can do specific features with it. So it has a whiteboard where you could draw, and it has like a timer if you were doing an activity where you could give them 2 minutes or 3 minutes and it counts down the time. It has a timer and counts down the minutes. You could always have your clock showing up so they know what time it is. And these features you can turn on and off. The traffic light allows you, to let them know that you've got time left. They're too noisy or people need to pay attention. You can do green light. You're good to go to start your project or start doing things. There's lots of different things that you can have. This is used in the classroom for teachers, but it can also be something that you use on Zoom when you're working with your students, and you can give them just a few things. The Zoom does have the opportunity, I've never used it either, to do a whiteboard where you can draw and do math problems or draw a picture of a Venn diagram or something. And so that's a feature that you can use to engage your students.
A Venn diagram is a prerequisite for any instruction, I would say. So, Sarah.
Just to add on the whiteboard function, I've not used it in my class, but my daughter used it with her class recently, and it worked out really cool. And I thought about math classes in particular, and you can all use, everybody on the Zoom conference can use the same whiteboard and the same tools. So everybody can have the same annotation on the same board at the same time. So with third graders, ooh, that gets a little sketchy, but I think college students could restrain from the tic-tac-toe situation on the side there.
Mhm. Wow, where did the hour go? The hour is up already. We have time for one last comment, or does anybody, is there something that we left out? Something? Yes, Amanda and then Sarah.
We've got a couple questions, I think, maybe that were on YouTube, so I couldn't see them on Facebook, but someone texted me. So one topic was video bombing and how to manage or prevent that, which I know IT has put some resources together for that. So maybe we can send that out after the call. Also, are we going to get more training on breakout rooms and solving the problem of students sitting in the back of the room? And then Kara, let's make sure that you're able to share that site that you mentioned, the classroom screen one, or any of these third-party sites. We can make a list and send out after this. And then also just addressing the difficulty of managing 25 students and their expressions and their, individual level of understanding.
Okay, well, we will put these resources together and get them out. We have a suggestion for another topic on breakout rooms, drilling down on that. So we'll explore that. Anybody want to take the shot on the big classes and how to manage that with, a bunch of people in the class? And Kara?
If you have students that are at sites that sit at tables or desks, you can upset the fruit basket and tell them they have to change. And so move the people in the back to the front and rotate them through. But for managing large groups where you probably won't see everybody's faces on the screen, if you're using the gallery view option, the more people you add, the more pages you get, and you have to click to the right or to the left. You just have to keep everybody engaged by asking questions, involving them in opportunities to share out, and using those sites like Amanda uses, or playing Kahoot or something.
Did it again. Sarah, do you have another comment, or did somebody else have a comment?
Well, I was just going to mention that it's kind of challenging and overwhelming when you first look at integrating Zoom. I mean, it is a new technology, and so I have 3 words for you, and that is Zoom Help Center. They have really great resources for helping how to function. If you want to do something in Zoom, you can find some really good instructions on how to get that done by looking in the Zoom Help Center. And I think start small. Start with having 5 students do a meeting conference on how you use Zoom. Let's all get on here and figure out how this works, or what have you, or start using it for office hours or something like that. But start really basic and then branch out. I didn't start out by using polling and all these other things. I just getting in there and getting familiar and getting comfortable. Is when Zoom. That's really everything that we've talked about today are all things that you can replicate in Zoom that you're doing in your own classrooms. So that's kind of like my final thought.
Great. All right. Well, I really want to thank our panel, Kara, Sarah, Dawn, Donnie, and Amanda. You truly are rock stars, or I guess YouTube stars at State Fair Community College now in teaching with Zoom. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your teaching tips. And I'm sure, knowing each of you, I'm sure if people contacted you directly with follow-up questions, you'd be happy to answer those via email. So feel free to call them. If also, if you like this format, we're going to do a little survey, but if you like this format, we may explore other topics to do. And so if you have topics or like to volunteer on a panel for something, please direct email to me. And otherwise, keep up the great work teaching at State Fair Community College. That's what we're about, good teaching. And here's some good examples of that today. So thank you all, signing off from YouTube. See you all later.